It was like a deep reconciliation and a deep peace. And at the same time, there was this tunnel, and I had the feeling that I was sliding further and further into it. And there was just light, there was love, there was peace, and yet I was not finished. It was both moments in parallel, and then I was back. Then I was back on the sofa again with this infinite pain, with this infinite battle of death.
Miss Furmaniak, you have a diploma in pedagogy, you are a healing practitioner and author, and you have a very challenging life path, which has also led you to a near-death experience. Before I ask you to describe how this came about, how are you feeling today?
Right now I'm very excited and I'm happy to be able to do this interview with you today. As you can see, it is taking place with me in a laying position. I'm doing well today. I'm having a good day today. And yet, in recent years, I spent most of my life in a laying position.
About 20 years ago, in 2003, your life changed dramatically. What happened back then?
At that time, I caught between 40 and 60 tick bites. I had a garden where the ticks were practically marching up my legs. And in parallel to that, I had a virus infection, mononucleosis. At that time, however, that was not yet clear. I simply had a fever of over 40 degrees for 6 weeks. And then it started that I didn't really feel my arms anymore. I had paresthesia, and the feeling that the right half of my face was no longer there, numbness. At that time, I was treated for the flu. There was a suspicion of a brain tumor or MS, and I never recovered again. I was incredibly exhausted. In 2004, I had chronic headaches, and in 2004-2005, it turned into a meningoencephalitis, an infection of the brain and the meninges. And at that time, for the first time, I was bedbound for a whole year.
That means you have had uninterrupted pain since those tick bites.
Yes. Not a day without pain, or more than 20 years.
You were initially treated for the flu. What happened next, medically?
To be honest, nothing. The flu meant we had to wait. It would get better on its own. When it still hadn't gotten better, after a quarter of a year, they speculated it may be psychosomatic, something psychological. I then went to a psychosomatic rehab clinic, started psychotherapy. The pain didn't change at all. And on the contrary, it got worse and worse, up to the point where all I could do was lie down.
And then came the time when it was said the patient is out of therapy.
Yes, exactly. In 2004 to 2005, I was treated with traditional medicine for a year. I was introduced at a pain therapy congress in front of 20 people, and I think that was one of the worst days of my life. At this pain therapy congress, I was told that I had been fully treated in terms of traditional medicine. The last chance I had was to put myself in an artificial coma.
Excuse me, what does that mean, introduced at a congress? You were the case and you were interviewed by 20 people?
Yes, exactly. They interviewed me, so to speak. What I had already tried, which drugs I had taken. They asked me again what had happened before. And the result was that they had no ideas left.
That means you were faced with a decision. I'm going to be put in a coma now, and I don't know whether and in which state I will wake up again.
Exactly, whether I'm going to wake up again at all, and if so, in which state.
What was your decision?
Not to be put in a coma. I was lucky. My father had found a doctor at the time. It was a private clinic. Lidocaine, that's what it's called, is a sedative that goes directly into the spinal ganglia and into the brain. I was in this clinic for 11 weeks. My parents paid for it at the time. It wasn't a nice therapy to get this shot directly into the skull and into the spinal cord. That was torture. But after 11 weeks, I was able to get up again to some extent and found my way back to life, more or less. I kept having relapses. I still had these chronic pains. Exhaustion was still there. But I managed to get back to normal at some point.
And how did the near-death experience come about?
That was actually in 2004 or 2005. I remember my husband, who was almost always around me at the time, went to his friend that evening. I was alone at home, and in that moment I felt, now something will happen. Now I'm slipping away. Now I'm sliding into a tunnel. I can't describe it in any other way. It was actually as if everything was happening in parallel. Like time is no longer linear, but time is just eternal, I would say. That was also the moment where I had the feeling that life is eternal. And I slid into this tunnel. I felt like, oh, now it's coming to an end. And the other part in me was like, but I don't want to. I don't want to go yet. I'm not finished yet. Franz and I have only been together for a year. We have just moved in together. He was my great love, and it was clear, no, I don't want to go yet. And then I was in this tunnel, and I remember there were a lot of sequences from my childhood. I saw myself on the tricycle. I saw myself with my brother, with my parents. I saw my little bunny, how I played in the snow. And then my ancestors came. And then I had this feeling as if my grandparents were there. I had a very bad experience as a child with my uncle. He was violent and brutal. And he was there. I felt him as an energy. And it was like an infinite peace. So I thought, yes, it's good. He had his job in this world. It wasn't nice for me, but it was like deep reconciliation to feel such a deep peace. And at the same time, there was this tunnel, and I had the feeling that I was sliding further and further into it. And there was just light. There was love, there was peace, and yet I was not finished. It was both moments in parallel, and then I was back. Then I was back on the sofa again with this infinite pain, with this infinite battle of death. And then a few weeks later, it happened again. But somehow, it was this will to live, which was much bigger than this feeling of letting go. I can't describe it in any other way.
Was it a similar process at the second time?
Yes, it was a similar process. I was back in the tunnel. I saw my childhood sequences again, felt my family again, and was pulled back into this light.
That means the near-death experiences developed in both cases from very great pain and seamlessly out of your day-to-day consciousness.
Yes, it was actually seamless. Yes.
What did you see in your life reviews? Were there emotionally particularly touching situations, and was there any form of judgment associated with it?
There was no judgment anymore. No, that was actually the very touching and deep thing about it, precisely because it was coupled with this severe trauma that I experienced as a child. To then feel, wow, everything is fine. So there was no judgment. And no, there were no sequences where I can say that was a very special sequence. It was a very colorful and mixed sequence, which I hadn't otherwise consciously thought about. I no longer remember how I sat on my tricycle. It just came to me. Or my Beppo, my rabbit. He was suddenly there, and I hadn't thought about him for years before then. Those were colorful sequences from my life, yes.
This situation where you met other deceased people, was that at the same time with a review of your life, or was it afterwards?
I would say it was a touch afterwards. It was as if I had already progressed a bit further in the tunnel. That's how I would describe it now. First, my life came back, and then the encounters came. And it was really beautiful. It was like, it was just love. I can't describe it in any other way. It was just beautiful. There was nothing to discuss anymore, nothing to forgive. My grandpa, he was an alcoholic, and there were also very difficult experiences with him, but it was all love. It was all right.
Did you see the deceased people clearly with your senses, the same way we are perceiving each other now? Or was it more of a perception through energy?
It was just an energy, but it was very clear that it was the person. It was like feeling into it at that moment. I then thought, who is that? And I felt exactly that it was my grandma or my grandpa or my uncle. I felt the energy, and there was no form visible. It was no longer the way my grandma looked or the way my grandfather looked. It was simply the energy of the person.
Did you also have the feeling of being able to immerse yourself in this energy, the feeling of being able to become one with it, in the sense that you could also feel the situation and the motivation of others?
Yes, that was the case. If they had been able to speak, they would probably have asked for forgiveness. I think it was simply their fate in life and their task to experience this unhappy life. Yes, they would have asked me to forgive them if they had been able to. And that's why there was such a peace.
Those were important emotional moments, forgiveness and peace.
Yes, yes.
Was there a central feeling during this near-death experience that you then also took with you?
Now I am eternity. This feeling that I am eternal, that I come again and again. Since then I've been convinced that the soul comes again and again in a different body, in a different time. But I believe that we as a being, as a soul, are eternal. And I think through this recognition or feeling of this eternity, an infinite number of things have changed in my life.
Did you have this feeling, now I am eternity, for the first time? Or were you already spiritually oriented and thus somehow found yourself confirmed?
I was actually always spiritually oriented. As a young woman, I also meditated a lot, Zen meditation, but I had never felt this feeling before. And never after that. I felt it in me, but it only came in this moment of this near-death experience. There was this feeling.
Was this feeling there in both near-death experiences?
In the first near-death experience, very intensely. The second was much shorter. The sequence was much shorter. This first near-death experience was much longer and much more intense, and that is when this feeling arose.
Do you have the impression that these near-death experiences have fundamentally changed something in your life, in your handling of pain, in your confidence?
Yes, it has really changed everything. I no longer have a bucket list in my life that forces me to postpone something. Life is now and life is eternal. And I also knew that I couldn't shorten it. I have to go through certain processes. I always had the feeling that if I don't go through certain processes now, then I will come back and have it again. It was such a task for me to go through it further, through this pain. And I think if you are at the very bottom, then you can only experience life as magic. Life had a completely different quality, a lot of gratitude for what exists, what life actually means, what life is, for my husband, for our friends, for our family, for nature. It was such an infinite gratitude for everything that is there. And I don't think I felt that in that extent before.
You actually come to the conviction through the near-death experience that your disease, the pain, is to be seen as a task, right?
Yes. It got even stronger over the years. That was not the end yet. I still had a much longer, even steeper path ahead of me. And it still seems to be my task, yes.
How did it go on after you had been told there were no treatments left?
Then I went to the clinic that my father had discovered, these 11 weeks. And after this clinic, I slowly came back to everyday life. We got married shortly after the clinic. My husband then said, well, we can't grow any closer than this. And then we got married. Yes, and then I had waves again and again. Well, I had recurring brain inflammation when I had an infection, for example, or I had a surgery, or a periodontitis treatment, or something like that. And then I often lay in bed, bedridden, for a quarter or half a year. And then in 2018, it really turned into an even more difficult phase for me. Then I caught another tick bite, and at that time, the virus had spread like wildfire in my body. Then I had recurring paralysis.
After this recent tick bite?
No, that was already, I think, since 2012 or so. Then I had a surgery, and after this surgery, bruises started. That means I felt like a flash of light is traveling through me, and then 10 minutes later, I can't move. I'm paralyzed from my pelvis and 100% dependent on help.
So you feel it coming?
I feel it coming, yes. I feel it coming, unfortunately not far in advance. It happens within 10 minutes, but within those 10 minutes, I can feel it coming. And in 2018, that was the 8th of August, 2018, I think I'll never forget that day. I was at work and felt that the paralysis was coming again. I called my husband and said, you have to get me quickly, otherwise I won't be able to get home. And yes, that was the last day when I was completely upright. And yes, in 2019, I felt so bad again, that I had the feeling again, I'm dying. I can't do it anymore. But my body was stronger than the last time. And in 2019, on my birthday, the 18th of December is my birthday, I registered at Dignitas with the feeling I can't do it anymore. I just can't do it anymore. And I think what happened afterwards was not a near-death experience, but it was an even deeper experience. I said goodbye to my husband. I had to go to a clinic. I couldn't be here anymore.
The pain was simply unbearable.
It escalated completely. My doctor stood in front of me with tears in her eyes and said she can't do anything anymore. And when I saw her crying, I knew, oh, now it's really over. Now there's nothing left to do. And then my husband took me to a clinic with a friend of ours. And in this clinic, there is what is called hyperthermia. Then I came into this hyperthermia. It was like a last chance. And I think that what was there in my first near-death experience was even more present at the clinic, in a very conscious, deepened way. I said goodbye. I knew either my body gives up or I go to Dignitas. But I still wanted to live. I still didn't want to leave my husband alone here. I was still not done with my life. And then I started the hyperthermia treatment. You have to imagine it's like I'm laying here now and there's a tent over me. The tent ends just above my head. You lie in there for 3 hours. I once asked a nurse, she said it was about 60 to 70 degrees.
With the whole body?
And then you lie in this tent and develop a fever. It rises individually, sometimes 39, sometimes 40 degrees. And then I fell into this fever and let go. And I knew, now I have nothing left. I said goodbye. Now I can only let myself fall into the essence, into God, however you want to describe it, into what we really are. It doesn't go much deeper. It was such a deep letting go, such a deep letting go moment. And in the hyperthermia, I somehow slipped into a feeling, now I can get up again. I got up after the hyperthermia. I could walk 200 meters again for the first time. Up to then, I hadn't been able to get out of bed and walk to the kitchen or out of the clinic at all.
That was a breakthrough.
A breakthrough. I still couldn't really be up for a day or even more than 2 hours, but it was a breakthrough. I could return to life. And then life was even more magical, because I experienced it even more consciously. I actually said goodbye 3 times by that point. I experienced it 3 times and got out of it. I remember the first walk. The first walk was just from the entrance back and forth. There was dew, it was winter, there was ice on the leaves in the morning. That was just magical. It was so deep, so beautiful, and there was such gratitude, and that carries me through life now.
You had already registered at Dignitas, the Association for Active Death Aid in Switzerland.
Yes.
And then you deregistered.
And then I didn't react anymore. The registration was in progress, and then the first conversations took place. They then told me it doesn't happen from one day to the next. There are many conversations, and then I couldn't do it anymore.
It was a very long way to Dignitas. How did it really come about that you received a specific diagnosis?
The child's name is ME/CFS, myalgic encephalomyelitis, or chronic fatigue syndrome. I had to learn it by heart until I could pronounce the word at all. It was like a magical code for me. In fact, after 20 years, all these symptoms now had a box in which they fit. There was no therapy yet. There were no solutions, but after 20 years, it had a name. In fact, I'm grateful for Corona. When I had just been resurrected, what I just told you about, it was 2020. The first steps I took in the yard were right after lockdown happened. And everything that happened then was actually everyday life for me and my husband. This withdrawal, this staying at home, this fear, we knew it all. Somehow, I had the feeling, wow, I felt it all before. What's happening in the world right now? And I remember, maybe a year later, the first broadcasts were on TV about this topic, long COVID. And Herr von Hirschhausen made a program about the first people with long COVID in Heiligendamm in rehab. And I looked at that and started to cry. And I said, they all have the same things as me. For the first time, I was no longer an alien. I was always an alien to traditional medicine. What's going on? They could never really explain it. Why do I have the paralysis? What's going on in these moments? I don't have MS. I don't have a tumor. What is it? Why can't I be upright? And for the first time in almost 20 years, I see a lot of people who are going through the same thing as me. And it was like an inner relief. It doesn't help because if you follow it in the media, you know that there is still no pill and there is still no healing for these people or for us. But it was something like, wow, now I understand what's happening in my body as well as it can be understood. Because until today, we still don't know what kind of pathomechanism is really behind it. But it really touched me to see that there are a lot of people who have the same fate as me, and we all go down the same path. From psychosomatics, what's going on there, feeling left alone, feeling powerless, feeling like there are no treatments left. That's not easy. The strange thing about it was when I Googled it, the disease was still not really known. When I talked to my doctor, she still didn't know anything about the disease. I was again in the clinic I told you about. I actually referred the doctors to this disease, and they then Googled and figured out that this disease exists. By now, it's more and more well known. But it still happens that doctors don't know about the disease. So it was exciting to see that all these symptoms that I have are also present in the affected patients. But there is no solution. There are now 2 contact points in Germany, one for children and one for adults.
In Germany, there are estimated 400 to 500,000 people affected. There is more research being done. Do you have new hope?
I definitely have more hope. I am aware that this is probably a longer process. Madame Professor Dr. Scheibenbogen of the Charité, who did research on this topic, recently said that we still have to be patient another 3 years. That gives me hope.
When you look back on your life to date, do you believe that you had to go through all this? Do you believe in a kind of guidance, that a special process of gaining insight was connected for you, that it couldn't have come any other way? Do you believe in such a guidance?
Yes, I believe in such a guidance. I also believe that I have always been guided and still am guided. I would say that this also has to do with intuition, with the connection to God, to my essence. And yes, it was probably or is this task in my life. I think I had to feel it so deeply, was allowed to feel it, that a lot of growth happened in me. When I was very sick, I read a book by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist, a neurologist who was detained at a concentration camp. He survived the concentration camp, and he was very concerned with the subject of meaning.
Yes to life in spite of everything.
Yes to life in spite of everything, exactly. And this yes, in spite of everything, this spiteful yes, to live now more than ever, that is actually in me, and that's why I felt so connected to Viktor Frankl. He was such a deep teacher to me. I think he also wrote in one sequence, he decided that if he survived the concentration camp, then he would continue to work on the subject. He wanted to write a book. He taught it. That was his life's task. And when I was back on my feet to some extent, I started writing. At that time, I also promised myself and my husband, I will write a book. And I will write the book for all the people who are traveling in this depth, who are quiet, silent, and have no words. When you are suddenly in need of care, in need of help, there are no treatments left. So much is happening. What is the meaning of life if you are just lying on the sofa and trying to survive? Viktor Frankl said, this is a provisional existence. And that's exactly how my life felt like, a provisional existence. Everything that made sense to me before, my job, my calling, my hobbies, everything I loved, was no longer there. It was just about surviving. And what is the meaning of that? And that's where Viktor Frankl helped me. He gave me a sentence that went through me when I read it. It's not about the question, what do I expect from life, but what answer do I give to life?
What does life expect from me?
What does life expect from me? What answer do I give to life? What does life expect from me? And that was like an upheaval within me. And all these emotions that are there, guilt, shame. I felt guilty that I was sick. What did I do wrong? I felt guilty toward my husband that I was ruining his life. I was ashamed to accept help. I needed diapers. I had to be washed. Where do you talk about these things? They have no place in our society. What does it mean? Where is the space? There is no space. And now I have so much feedback from people who are affected, who say, wow, to name these things, to express what is happening there, a lot of growth is required. A lot.
Whatever questions life will ask you, I wish you all the best. Thank you very much for your openness, for the valuable impulses. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you too.